Hello and welcome back. So we're going to be covering the second part of looking at self and social development. We are live from my homeschooling room, as you can tell from the things posted behind me. So I'm going to put myself up in the corner now and I'll narrate as we go along. So let's take a look at what we're going to be covering now. We are going to be focusing on the role of peers when it comes to social and emotional development. So let's get started. Here is my guy who represents my preschoolers, and let's take a look at what peer relations are like for preschoolers. Believe it or not, they do have a social life too. So in preschool, what tends to happen is they make friends based upon individuals who are similar to them. So they typically look for same gender, same age, those sorts of physical traits, superficial material kinds of traits that they can bond on. What we tend to see is the friends that they make are really momentary playmates, that they simply have something in common at that time. So they happen to be at the same playground. They happen to both be at the My Little Pony movie. They have something in common. They might only see each other for one day, but they might still say that person is their best friend. So again, it's this temporary playmate who they see as a friend based upon something physical that they have in common. Now we are at elementary school. So how does peer relations change? Here they do start to describe their friends a little bit deeper than just the fact that they both are at the same playground at the same time. They focus on slightly more internal traits, like they might say that they like a girl because she's nice, or they like someone because they share well, or they like someone because they're funny. So they will have some sort of a personality trait attributed to their feelings of the person. All right, now we're moving into middle school. Here's my middle school girl. What happens there? Our friendships get much more stable. So elementary school, they can still change month to month, week to week. Middle school, they really get a lot more set. And those friendships are what we call reciprocal, meaning it's based upon give and take, that there is an equality among the friendships, that they're both looking out for and helping one another in some way. What else we see as their relationships are based upon a mutual caring, a mutual understanding that they both support one another, and they do start to have loyalty to their friends in middle school. So high school, well, I'm sure you all can guess this one. High school isn't that far in your past. There's an incredible increase in the amount of time you spend with your friends in high school, as well as the intimacy that is shared. And by intimacy, I mean sharing what you really think, sharing what you really feel, having those kinds of authentic conversations. And the reason that there's a dramatic increase in time is because you do have more independence as a high schooler, more extracurriculars. You get to spend more of that kind of after school time together. In high school, this dramatic increase in loyalty and intimacy is related to the fact that they start to understand that people have their own feelings, and their feelings might be different from their own, and that really helps them better understand and connect with others. And they really start to look to their friends for support, for a sense of security. And really, that's perhaps in high school the only people they get that from. Remember adolescent egocentrism. So they might still have this personal fable feeling like, okay, my parents don't understand me, teachers can't understand me, but my peers understand me. So they have that connection to one another. So I thought I'd ask the question, as we're talking about peer relationships, what do we get from them? What are the benefits of them? What do we gain from having friends? In preschool, believe it or not, and even though I said in preschool they are momentary playmates most of the time, they do get a lot from play, and they actually get a lot from all of the disputes and arguments that come about in play in preschoolers. It teaches them things like cooperation. Here's an important one: concessions, that they're not always going to get their way. They can't always win. It's not always their turn. They start to learn the idea of, I'm going to have to give and take. I'm going to have to share. I'm going to have to cooperate sometimes to resolve problems. For children at this age period, these are crucial lessons. So now, think about the kids that don't have playmates when they're preschoolers. they are going to have a lot to learn whenever they get to kindergarten. It is good to get these preschoolers out there interacting with others. Even if it is sometimes complicated and noisy, they are gaining a lot from it that will help them in the future. When it comes to these play and disputes that I discussed, it really helps them start to see that, oh, not everyone sees things exactly the way I do. Other people might have different opinions. Maybe not everybody likes My Little Pony. Maybe not everyone likes Matchbox cars. It helps them start to see things differently and kind of break out of their egocentrism that we'll be talking about when we cover Jean Piaget. Another thing they tend to get from play and disputes is it shows them that what they do affects other people. And that is huge. The fact that if they have a fit, that perhaps other people aren't going to want to hang out with them. Because if they're being annoying, if they're being bothersome, their friends will just, go do something else and they'll learn, wow, my behavior affected that person. If they're mean to someone and that person starts to cry or get upset, again, they need to understand that what they do affects other people, and that will greatly benefit them in your classroom in the future. All right, moving along. Elementary school. Here's my elementary school girl. So here's where they really start to do what we call social comparison. So they're really starting to, they look at themselves and they compare themselves to all these kids around them in their classroom because they're constantly being assessed on how they're doing in math and science and who can run the fastest and who's the best artist. So they get very busy with comparing themselves socially. Okay, so in case any of you are noticing the noise that's going on behind me, I thought I'd stop for a moment and let you see what I'm dealing with here. So this is my cat Lily. She loves making noises when I'm recording. I'm going to scoot her and then continue. So bear with me. I'm back. So where were we? So again, elementary students really start to compare themselves to those around them. And what happens is they start to really focus on the importance of acceptance. They want to be liked by others. They want to be seen as competent by others, not just their peers in their classroom, but also by their parents and their teachers. They really value how other people view them. All right, moving along to middle childhood. What do they get from friendships? Well, what they tend to start to focus on is social standing. Peer acceptance starts to change a little bit in middle school. It's not just about the fact that they want to be liked. It's that what is important to them is where they stand among their peers, what clique they're in, whether or not they're popular. So this idea of how other people view you gets to be a little bit bigger and more important to them in middle childhood. In high school, what we tend to see is what we call adolescent reflectivity. They're spending time thinking about themselves. Who am I? What's important to me? What's my personality like? How does that connect to other people? They also are more likely to negatively view themselves. Think about what we covered in self-esteem and how self-esteem, although it starts to rise in high school, it's still relatively low. And they tend to be very self-critical. And during this period of reflectivity, they're also thinking about how they're unique. And also within that uniqueness, who they are similar to. So it's kind of an interesting thing. And they're also really thinking about issues of identity. Gender identity, what they want to be when they grow up, religious identity, political identity. They're figuring out who they are and fitting that in with the bigger social puzzle of, and who do I like and who do I fit in with? And that comes along with these friendships. That's one of the things that they get from is by spending time with others, it helps them compare and think about themselves. All right, so another issue within the world of peer development is called peer acceptance. It is also called sociometric status. I'm going to explain what it is, how researchers measure this, and how it can be used to describe students in middle and high school. So let me start by defining it. Sociometric status is how much a child is liked and noticed by others. Now, that might sound like a difficult thing to study, and it is. So it helps us to go beyond the idea of looking at friendships, but also looking at how well students are accepted by their peers. Who likes them, who wants to play with them, and why. Okay? So, what you do is you ask children to nominate peers in their classroom that they want to spend time with. Those that they like and those that they dislike. You might also ask them to rate each of their peers on a scale according to how much they like or dislike them, and indicate who do they prefer to play with. So, in a nutshell, you go into a classroom, and again, it's middle or high school typically. One way you can do this is you give everybody a note card, and you say, okay, on that note card, I want you to tell me who do you most want to spend time with in this class? Then you collect those note cards. You pass the note cards out again and you say, who do you least want to spend time with? And you collect those. The researchers go back and sort all of them. And then they're able to actually come up with different categories of peer acceptance. And let's go over them. I do want to point out that peer acceptance, and you might say how well someone does on this inventory, is often based upon your social skills. So people like to spend time with those who are nice to them and those who are cooperative and easy to get along with and kind. These are the skills that tend to help someone fare well in this type of study. What we have found is it's not really about who's in the popular clique. It's about who's a good person and who has good social skills. Here's a short video, so if you're not certain what I mean by good social skills, this one comes from the field of social emotional learning, and it talks a little bit about the kinds of social skills that students need to have.
The social awareness is about embracing diversity, showing empathy for others. Activities might include service learning projects, addressing social justice issues. Role-playing is a great opportunity for students to address how a person might have felt in a conflict on the playground. Relationship skills are important in project-based learning. It's the ability to work cooperatively with someone to resolve conflict.
It's the one skill you need your whole life. You may not need calculus tomorrow, but you have to know how to work in a relationship, whether it's for a coworker or a life partner. You have to know how to handle conflict and how to handle challenges.
So I like this video. I know it's brief, but it shows you not only the social skills that are necessary and helpful for friendships, but also connecting them to things that teachers can do in the classroom. Okay, so moving along. How well one fares in this type of research is also related to cognitive abilities. These research studies have found that students who do well academically also tend to be liked by their peers. And then lastly, physical attractiveness. They have also found that students who are more physically attractive do also tend to be more liked by their peers. Whether that is for good or for ill, that is simply one of the findings that they have had. And peer acceptance is actually quite a strong predictor of how students are faring psychologically. And that makes sense. If you have students that like you and want to spend time with you, you're probably a happier person. You probably like school more. You probably feel better about yourself. So you can see how these two things can go hand in hand. All right, so peer acceptance, how does this tend to work? There are a variety of categories, and I'm going to go over them. The first category is what we call peer accepted. Now, they used to call this popular, but we all know popular has a different connotation, the idea of the cool clique. So peer accepted is a much better vernacular. The idea of these are the students that other peers like. So when you ask them, who do you most want to spend time with? These are the kids whose names came up over and over and over on these note cards. Other kids like them. Other kids want to spend time with them. They also, doing later inventories, found that these are the students who tend to be most sensitive, caring about one another's needs, easy to get along with. So they have good social skills. I try to think of some pop culture references, and to be honest, cartoons fit with these pretty well. Whether you're looking at The Simpsons or South Park, they really do their research on psychology, and they try to have characters that fit all these different peer acceptance categories. So Stan and Kyle here would probably fit for peer acceptance because other people want to spend time with them within that show. So within the world of popular, what we tend to see is these are the kids that get a lot of few nominations and very few, if any, negative ones. They are not disruptive. They are not negative in their behaviors. They have the social skills to be able to negotiate and cooperate and work with one another without being aggressive. And they're good at starting and keeping social interactions with one another. So again, they have those good social skills. Some other examples I thought of from popular media. I've got one from Glee, one from One Tree Hill. I thought that perhaps those might help you better understand socially accepted. All right, now we have rejected children. I know it's a horrible term, rejected. No one wants to feel as if any child is rejected, but if this is something that does come up in this research, these are the children that are actively disliked. So when you ask the students, who do you least want to spend time with? These are the kids that come up in that pile. Because other students don't want to spend time with them, they are at risk for emotional and psychological problems. So who are these students? Who is in the rejected category? This is important to know because there are psychological implications. First, we have the rejected aggressive student. These are the ones you would call your class bully, and it makes sense that people don't want to spend time with them because they are hostile and threatening. If you are mean to others, if you are aggressive to get your way, and you have a hostile attribution bias, meaning that you also make the assumption that other people have hostile intentions towards you, people aren't going to want to spend time with you. Some examples I thought of in popular media, I think Draco Malfoy is a good example. Obviously, the bullies from Christmas Story and David and Glee. So, rejected aggressive, bullies that people don't want to spend time with. There is another category, though, within rejected children, and that is the rejective submissive. So these are the opposite. They are in no way mean or hostile. They're simply very socially awkward. Now, I'd like to point out, this doesn't mean shy. You can be introverted and shy and still be liked by your peers. It's the socially awkward student that comes up in rejected children. So they might be anxious in social situations. They might show shyness, but also wariness, meaning that they kind of shy away from or they don't interact with others. When they are in a social situation, they're very uncomfortable and awkward. They don't know what to say or do. And then what happens is the reason that peers kind of steer away from these kids is they don't know how to act towards them. Because these children, it's very difficult to predict how they're going to react. And because of that uncertainty, peers become less willing to approach them. I thought this was a good example. I know it's kind of a funny meme, but it does also relate to the socially awkward child. Some other examples I could think of from popular media, Brink from the Middle, from Diary of the Wimpy Kid, from Glee. I think these students might all fit that example, even though they're shown as being also somewhat endearing sometimes in popular media. Then we have the average child. So the average child is really your typical kid. They have friends. They aren't in that category of being super popular or peer accepted. They're not unpopular. They're just a well-adjusted average kid who has a good number of friends. There are no negative psychological implications for this child. They get an average number of positive and as well as some negative nominations. They're not in any of the extreme categories, and this is where most children are. The majority of the students in your class will be in this average category. And okay, so from Family Guy, I thought Chris might be my example for that. Number 4, we have controversial children. This is one of the more interesting categories. So you'll see here I have them described as being both very disliked and very liked. Both liked and disliked. What might a student do to make them, and I'll take it to the extremes, loved by some and hated by others? You got any examples? Well, there are actually a variety. It could be that this is a student that is hostile. Maybe they are disruptive. Maybe they are acting out and they get people to laugh. Maybe they're incredibly popular in that popular clique. Typically, the controversial child has both some positive and negative characteristics. So they might be incredibly physically attractive, but also mean at the same time. They might be mean, and so you would think, oh, rejective aggressive. But maybe they're funny too. So if they're mean and funny, they might end up in controversial. So they have some good and some bad traits that make people both like them and dislike them at the same time. So they might engage in aggressive behavior, similar to that rejective aggressive child, but they compensate for it somehow. They have some sort of a positive social behavior that in some way redeems them a little bit, or at least with some people it does. They can also be cooperative and sociable if they choose and depending on who they're with. Some examples I thought of, I have glee, I have insatiable. I think another great example of the controversial student comes from Mean Girls.
Where are the plastics?
13 royalty. If North Shore was Us Weekly, they would always be on the cover.
That one there, that's Karen Smith. She is one of the dumbest girls you will ever meet. Damien sat next to her in English last year.
She asked me how to spell orange.
That little one, that's Gretchen Wieners.
She's totally rich because her dad invented toaster strudel.
Gretchen Wieners knows everybody's business. She knows everything about everyone.
That's why her hair is so big, it's full of secrets.
What's happening? An evil takes a human form in Regina George. Not be fooled, because she may seem like your typical selfish, backstabbing, slut-faced hoe bag, but in reality, she is so much more than that.
She's the queen bee, the star. Those other two are just her little workers.
So again, fabulous example for controversial, having both very negative and somewhat positive traits. Okay, and then we have the neglected child. So this one is interesting. This is the child that they are likable, but they just seem to not be seen by their peers. So when you do the index card study, you might notice this child didn't come up on anyone's cards. They're not liked or disliked. Or maybe they only came up on one or two people's cards. It's like they're just simply not seen or thought about. These students are typically your shy introverts. Interestingly, you might feel bad for these students thinking, oh no, they're not noticed by their peers, but there tends to be no psychological negative implications for these kids. They just might be temporarily overlooked. Sometimes it's because they're the new kid. Maybe they're just very quiet. This typically is not a category that we consider to be negative for the student. So again, some examples in Mean Girls, when she first moves there, she feels overlooked. Luna Lovegood might also be in that category that people just don't always seem to notice her. All right, we're going to end with some teaching tips for positive social emotional development.
In recent years, some schools have worried that kids aren't ready for the real world when they graduate. They don't have the relationship skills to cope in college and career. They're not ready for the changing demands of a new workforce.
We're not generally comfortable in an office setting, I would say. I get cooped up. I won't go into an office that's ever been used before.
I am no good before 11 a.m.
They feel like if they work on those skills in school, students will also be ready to face academic challenges. They'll learn more deeply, and they'll have better relationships in the process. It's called social emotional learning.
So social awareness, relationship skills, responsible decision-making, and self-awareness today, and self-management. Was self-management the one we're working on this week? Yes. Okay, so let's take a look at each.
Among the biggest challenges for adopting social emotional learning is defining exactly what it is. Most comprehensive SEL programs have a couple of layers. At the core is an evidence-based program that focuses on a menu of students' social and emotional skills. The next layer involves infusing those skills into classroom lessons in things like math and reading by encouraging students to do group work and open-ended problem solving. And the outer layer changes school and district policies in things like discipline and parent engagement. Teachers are at the core of making basically anything work in a school. So when a district embraces SEL, it needs to get teachers on board and make sure they feel comfortable putting it into place.
Okay, so I know that video was brief, but it is discussing a relatively new movement in the field of education, which is focusing on social emotional learning. So in addition to everything else you're going to be covering in your classroom, the idea of focusing on helping your students psychologically in the classroom. But for now, that is it for Chapter 2, our part on self and social development. Thanks for your patience, and see you next time. Maybe, if I can get this clicked off.